Here's another great recipe from the John Townshend Universal Cookbook from 1773. This one is called a pancake pudding. I think this one's going to turn out great. So in the Universal Cook, this one's a pretty interesting recipe for the little nugget that's kind of carried in at the end. So we can get a little bit of idea about what he thought about this recipe and sort of maybe the roots or who it was for. He says, pour melted butter over it when it comes out of the oven. 'Tis a cheap and very acceptable pudding, being less offensive to the stomach than fried pancakes. So there we can see it's actually meant to be an inexpensive dish. Or at least based upon an inexpensive dish. This one does have brandy in it and some other items that make it a little higher class, but you don't necessarily have to put those in. And it's very acceptable. So he doesn't say this is delicious. And then he says it's less offensive to the stomach than fried pancakes. So apparently some people, maybe all that oil and fats in the frying didn't make them feel good, but a baked version of a pancake was acceptable to their stomachs. I'm not sure how different it really was, but he seemed to think so. So this is a very interesting one, and you can see how it's tied in with maybe less expensive cooking for the time period. Let's look at the ingredients. The ingredients are simple. This is basically a rich pancake of the time period. So we have, let's see, what our first ingredient is a quart of milk. So I've got a quart of milk here, 4 eggs, 2 spoonfuls of flour. Who knows exactly how much flour they really mean in this one. Really what we're gonna do is get to a particular consistency with this batter, because it talks about basically making it up as a batter. So the flour is gonna be the thing we add until we get to the right consistency. We also have the standard sort of spice for pancakes. Ground ginger is the main spice in here. Obviously we've got a little bit of salt, and the last ingredient, which kind of again makes this a rich pancake, is we've got some brandy here. We can either use brandy, we could use sack. We don't have to use either of these if we don't want to. That just kind of spices it up a little bit. And we'll need a little bit of butter too, but not much. Now that we've got all our ingredients ready to go, all we need to do is basically whip all these things up into a batter. And let me just get our 4 eggs in there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add in, it says a whole quart of milk. Let's add in some spices now. I've got, again, a teaspoon of ginger. Let me get this whisking in. I'm gonna go ahead and add in that pinch of salt here, maybe half a teaspoon or so. The last of my liquids, I've got some brandy here, as much or as little as you want on that. And on the ginger, you can add a little bit more ginger if you like that, or back off of the ginger. If you want to put a little bit different twist on your pancakes, or your pancake pudding in this case, a little bit of nutmeg, obviously put in quite often in the time period. Now let's bring in some flour and start to bring that into it till we get to our batter quantity. Looks good. We've got a nice battery kind of consistency, maybe a thin batter, but that's basically what the recipe called for. So we're going to go ahead and run with that as a thin batter. I trust John Townshend in this recipe book. Now let's go ahead and butter up a baking dish. Again, I'm just going to use another one of these redware pie plates. They're generally just about the right size, so that if you want to bake this in a Dutch oven, if you're at a camp situation, you're outdoors and you don't have an oven to bake in, you can use one of these pie plates and a Dutch oven and bake this right there on site at an event. Such a great way to experience history in a little bit different way. And really, we do need to take time to bake things like these at events, because that's what it's all about. Our dish is ready. I can just basically pour the batter in, and I don't want to overfill this. If I've got a little bit too much, well, maybe I overshot on the batter, but it looks really good. Let's leave some space for this, because this is gonna bake and do a kind of a weird thing. They kind of bake faster at the edge, and they sort of build up a wall. So this will bake and come out a little interesting looking. It won't look like a pie, that's for sure. But this guy is ready to go in the oven. Again, about let's say 350 degrees on this guy, and 35 minutes should bake this up. This might be a little thicker, so it might take a little bit more time than that, but somewhere in that 30 to 45 minute range, depending on the size of the pan you're using to bake this in. So let's get this one in the oven. The pancake pudding came out of the oven, looks wonderful. This one's cooled off just a bit and it's ready to eat. I'm gonna try it plain. The recipe actually says something like, when it comes out of the oven, pour butter all over it. Okay, that's a very, very simple pudding sauce, right? I wanna try this without that just to see what kind of flavors we have. And we can see it settles nicely. This one's got some color variation to it. So, remember in the text he called it acceptable. Okay, I think the pudding sauce, what we do with this, is actually going to bring out most of the flavors. This is a very, very simple dish. So I created a pudding sauce, and we actually have an episode on nothing but pudding sauces. And if you want to go back and check that, I'll try to put a link in the description section for the pudding sauce. Here I've made up a simple pudding sauce. It's got some sugar, it's got butter, and some sack wine. You can put a little brandy in here or something like that. We don't need a lot here. Obviously today on pancakes, what do? We put maple syrup on them, or other people put other kinds of, just plain, granulated sugar or whatever. Let's find out what this one's like. More than acceptable. Very interesting, very simple, and in some ways it takes less effort and less time than frying up a bunch of pancakes, in the pan. Then you can serve it up sort of like a pie. Wonderful, interesting experience taking some of these recipes right out of the 1773 cookbook. I really want to thank everyone for coming along on this little journey. We're testing these things out. We're trying out things that maybe haven't been, cooked quite like this for hundreds of years. Maybe you cook something like this today, and that's some of these interesting things. Some of these are lost and forgotten in some areas, and then some families or some regions cook something almost exactly like this today. That's what I find so fascinating about some of these recipes. But I want to thank you for coming along, supporting us, watching these videos, giving them thumbs ups, commenting on them, sharing them online. Such an important thing with you do that you do. And when you support us, we have people that support us on Patreon. Some folks come to our website and check out all these really interesting things that we have to sell. Pipkins and interesting plates, and all the cooking vessels that we use, all the clothing that we use for reenacting in the 18th century. Such a wonderful experience. I want to thank you for coming along with us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.